Hello, good evening everyone. I'm your Pankaj Sarma Sir. I have come up with another important session in the series of our APSC Mains 50 days live session that we have been conducting at CSAP IS Academy with an objective to help you all in your preparation of the mains exam. So today we have come up, based on your feedbacks and suggestions, today we have come up with another important topic, that is federalism and center-state relations in India. So basically in today's session we will be trying to understand the nature of federalism, what kind of center-state relationship, how it has evolved over a period of time, right? And what are the contemporary challenges, what are the recent debates, and how we can also interlink this particular topic from the multi-dimensional perspective, how we can interconnect it with other GS papers of your mains course, right? So let us begin our discussion for the day. As you know, we have been conducting this 50 days live sessions with an objective to help you in your preparation of mains. I would request that you spread it with all your friends who have been preparing or thinking of preparing for either APSC or UPSC, so that they can benefit from some of our live sessions where we bring the gist of some of the important themes, and based on your feedbacks we also come up with new and important topics as per your suggestions. So please share it with all of your friends, do subscribe our channel and do like, so that you keep on getting latest updates and you do not miss on any important discussions that we may come from time to time. So we have been also coming up with certain interview guidance programs. So those who are preparing for enforcement inspector exam, so they can also approach us. Along with that, we have been conducting, as we told earlier also, that we have been conducting this differentiator batch where we extensively train you on writing essay, and at the end of the session we offer a workshop which will definitely help you in your preparation for the essay paper. And I myself have been conducting this ethics course, which is going to be very, very interesting, because ethics contains a very important portion, not just as one of the important papers in your mains, but also because in your interviews you will also be asked many such questions which will be coming from your ethical understanding, your understanding of the ethics, right? Because ultimately as a bureaucrat you have to apply ethics in the administration to make the administration an ethical administration. So if you feel like, you can come and join us, and during this live session itself a Google form will be circulated, and you can follow that Google form and leave your comments, queries and everything, and our CSAP IS Academy team will get back to you, and they will provide all the help that is required in your journey. So without much delay, let me straight away come to the topic, because it's a very vast topic, very big topic that we have taken up today. So it may be very challenging for us to complete the topic in such a short span. So what we will be doing is that we will be covering the gist of the topic, we will be covering the most important portion of the topic, and based on your feedbacks and comments, and therefore I would invite that you please drop your comments, you please give us suggestions, you please drop your queries, so that we can come up with subsequent such videos where maybe if there is specific requirements from your side, we can build upon them and we can provide more extensive and detailed lecture on these themes also, right? So for in these live sessions we are basically introducing the themes and generating that interest, and also giving you the idea, right? Giving you that perspective as in how to approach this topic, right? So use this opportunity, but most importantly do participate through your comments in this video, so that we also know that you are also benefiting from this, and we also know that what are the things that you would like to hear from us, or what kind of lecture videos that you want us to come up with. All right, so as you see, today's topic is federalism and center-state relations, and we are also going to basically understand its interconnectedness with other GS papers, right? And this is going to be very helpful in your both APSC and UPSC mains preparation. Okay, now what is federalism? as we all know that federalism is a cornerstone of India's constitutional framework, right? But how do we understand, this federalism? What is federalism? How do we define it? So in brief, we can say that federalism can be understood as a method of promoting self-rule and shared rule and balancing the interest of a nation with that of its region. So basically, you have both self-rule and shared rule in federalism, right? And where you balance the interest of a nation with that of the region, right? So, and if we can take up, if you can just briefly, if I can introduce one of the important definition offered by some of the renowned scholars on the topic of federalism, like for example Professor MP Singh and Beena Kukreja. Both of these have been the head of the departments of Delhi University Political Science Department. So if I can give their definition, Professor MP Singh and Beena Kukreja say that federalism in its broadest sense is a kind of political mechanism involving at least two orders of government, right? So to begin with, in the definition, what becomes important is that it is a political mechanism involving at least two orders of government. There has to be at least two orders of government, and it builds upon that definition, saying that two orders of government in the same political space with shared as well as self-rule, right? In the same political space where there is shared as well as self-rule, and in a constitutionally divided jurisdiction. So that means their jurisdiction is again constitutionally divided. There may be two orders of government which are constitutionally divided, right? And they exercise power in some of the domains, single-handedly, and in some cases this power is exercised in a shared manner, right? And this is done in such a manner that each is meaningfully autonomous and exclusive, and therefore but they are functionally interdependent and cooperative in their concurrent areas, right? And this definition actually captures the essence, right? So what we need therefore is at least, let's say, at least two orders of government, right? And this we can say self-rule and shared rule, right? We can say this is again their jurisdiction is constitutionally divided, right? So their jurisdiction is constitutionally divided, it involves at least two orders of government, and their jurisdiction is constitutionally divided, right? So where in some of the cases they exercise this self-rule, and in some of the cases there is shared rule, right? However, they are also functionally interdependent with each other in some of the concurrent areas, right? So this basically captures what is federalism, right? So for federalism to be federalism, the two orders of government become very, very important, right? Now, what does federalism basically then do? Federalism basically ensures that there is division of power, right? When there are two orders of government, between these two orders of government, this power, right? Powers have to be distributed between these two orders of government, right? And responsibilities also, right? So union and states, and in some cases, of course, provinces also it can be. Now this mechanism basically, right, or this method, so therefore federalism is a method through which both self-rule and shared rule is practiced, right? Balancing the interest that of a nation and the aspirations of the region also. And India's socio-cultural, linguistic and economic diversity. Now we know that India is a very diverse country. We have diversity in different segments. So this federalism, what it does is that it helps us balance, this diversity in a very meaningful, in a very productive manner, right? Now this theme basically we can always connect it with all the other GS papers, right? So as we said, this particular topic that we are taking up today is from GS paper 2, as you all know. However, we can always understand or link this topic with some other important topics from different other GS paper. For example, we can always try to understand the historical roots, federalism, right? So the historical roots of federalism, right? For example, how did it evolve, right? The concept of federalism, how it evolved and emerged, right? Secondly, fiscal and security aspect, the economic, basically economic dimension. And when we talk about federalism also, let's say these two tiers, when we talk about even in the here, even if we talk about center and state, here what will, this economy, for example, this economy again plays a very important role. The security dimension, again ethics and accountability, how this center and state relationship is regulated, right? How this relationship is regulated. So there ethical dimension to it, whether the power is exercised ethically or not, whether constitutional morality is upheld in regulating this center state relationship or not. All these things become very, very important for us. And finally, specifically when we talk about APSC mains exam, we also have Assam specific federal concern. So when you have Assam specific paper, there of course Assam specific federal concerns are there. For example, 6th schedule, right? So okay, so let's move on. So federalism therefore is a constitutional division of power between center and state. So it has been done through the constitution, okay? And many a times the nature of this, depending on how this power has been allocated between the center and the state, right? India's federalism many a times, and sometimes there is discourse with regard to Indian federalism, right? Whether Indian federalism is a truly, whether it's a truly an example of federalism or it's a half federalism kind of a thing. And in that context, it is many a times referred to as the quasi-federal, because in the Indian context, we have a bias or we have a tilt towards the center, right? This unitary tilt basically refers to this bias towards center. Bias towards centers. Now again, when we try to understand this, for example, earlier I said the evolution of this concept of federalism, how it has evolved over a period of time. If we want to understand that, then definitely we need to situate our understanding vis-a-vis GS paper 1, that is history. We need to understand the history. We need to read history, or we can link it with the history. Similarly, why this bias towards center in the Indian design of federalism? If we want to respond to this question, again we have to look at the historical developments, the challenges at the time of independence, what kind of challenges that India was facing, and how in order to resolve to some of those problems, for example, the problem of princely states and the integration, right? Integrating those princely states, maintaining unity and integrity of the nation. So this was, at that time it was feared that whether India would be able to sustain that or not. And it was felt that in order to, promote that unity and integrity, probably more power needed to be given to the center, so that in those moments of crisis, so that in those moments of emergency, center could proactively work upon it and maintain the unity and integrity of the nation. So therefore, what kind of federalism that Indian federalism would emerge as, again, was dependent on the historical developments, right? So any understanding of topics like federalism, it may appear to be clearly a topic of political science, right? But then it is equally important for us to have the understanding of history if we want to make better sense of the evolution of federalism and why a particular type of federalism that emerged in India, right? Okay, now finally, cooperative federalism I will come to towards the end, but now let's say how it has been described, that a unitary state with subsidiary features. We already said that quasi-federal or a unitary state with subsidiary, with federal features. Often it is referred to that there are some federal features, but it is more like a unitary state. So that kind of an observation have been made by various scholars, but nonetheless Indian federalism falls in the category of federalism only, and therefore it may not fall into the straitjacket definition of that federalism, but we have, as we said, we basically designed it as per the requirements of our specific context. And that's why, in order to understand the nature of Indian federalism, we need to understand the context, and understanding the context basically comes from reading of our history, right? So I hope this much is clear so far. So now, as we said, in the Indian context, in this federalism where center and state, the power has been constitutionally divided. When we say this power has been constitutionally divided, that means the constitution mandates, there is a mention of the division of power between center and state in the constitution. That is what we mean when we say constitutionally divided. These powers are constitutionally divided, right? So and we find that in the 7th schedule, okay? And when we talk about, for example, federalism, as we have been talking about, the nature of federalism, as we said earlier, some basic requirements are there, and in the context of Indian federalism also, when we look at it, Indian federalism fulfills those basic requirements. However, the nature of Indian federalism becomes somewhat different because we incorporated some specific provisions in our constitution because of the imperative, because of the context, and in that particular context, those provisions were thought as very important, and it was believed that these provisions will actually help us maintain unity and integrity of the nation. So therefore, let's say the presence of two orders of government becomes very important, as it became very important, very much clear from the very definition of Professor M.P. Singh and Bina Kukreja, right? Because in their definition they said that it is a political mechanism involving at least two orders of government or two tiers of government, right? It is only then when at least you have two orders or two tiers of government, then comes the question of distributing power between them. But if there is no two orders or two tiers of government, then where do you distribute the power, isn't it? So therefore, obviously by very definition it becomes very important to have at least two tiers or two orders of government, right? So along with that, so therefore we have in Indian context that, and then you need to have a written constitution. For example, a written constitution becomes very important. A written constitution, remember earlier we said constitutionally divided power, these powers are constitutionally divided. So we need to have a constitution, written constitution, which divides the power between the center and the state. So does India fulfill this criteria or not? Do we have a written constitution? The answer is yes, right? So so if you are with me so far, and if you are enjoying the basic formulation of the concept, I would request you to just like and also subscribe the channel, that is CSAP IS Academy channel, because we are going to continue such live sessions, and based on your feedbacks and recommendations from time to time, that we will and because we will go through each and every comment that you will drop in these videos, and these comments will actually be very, very helpful for us to refine our lectures in the subsequent days. So if you have been traveling with me, if you have been listening through all this discussion, and if you are liking it, please click on the like button, and most importantly subscribe the channel, right? All right, so let's move on. So we have therefore two tiers of government. We have written constitution. Now this written constitution, and we need independent judiciary. Again, another important criteria would be independent judiciary. Now why do we need independent judiciary? Why do we need independent judiciary? So I am now talking about what are the requirements, okay, of federalism. What are the things that we require for it to qualify as federalism, right? So of course, at least there has to be two orders of government, there has to be a written constitution, there has to be an independent judiciary. So now why is it that I am saying that independent judiciary is required? Okay, this independent judiciary, okay, this independent judiciary is required because let's say there are two tiers of government, center and state. Is it possible that at times, though the powers and functions of both the center and the state have been divided, through this written constitution, but is it possible that sometimes there may emerge some ambiguity, there may arise therefore some kind of a conflict in exercising those powers and functions by the center and the state? Is there a possibility? Of course, yes, there is a possibility, right? Even though the powers and functions have been clearly, delineated, divided, clearly outlined in the written constitution, right? The powers between the center and the state, but yet at times there may be, some kind of a conflict, some kind of ambiguity that may prevail, and in those moments, the role of that independent judiciary will come up, right? Then who will adjudicate those kinds of conflicts between the center and the state? Then it is the judiciary, right? And this judiciary therefore has to be independent, okay? And therefore again we can also say, if you have written constitution but the amendment process, again you can add on to that, or you can make some refinement to that also. Written constitution is perfectly fine, but also the provision of amending the constitution has to be, complex, has to be such that where the states also play important role, okay, effectively, right? So therefore otherwise tomorrow this constitution may be changed, altering the entire, federalism and its discourse, okay. So let us move in. So now let us look at the historical evolution, okay. Now this Government of India Act, as we know that when we talk about the constitution and its evolution also, we need to learn the background, right? We need to learn the history, right? And this basically Government of India Acts have played a very important role, right? Because they have in that sense provided the broad structure, right? And what did they do, right? Basically this Government of India Act 1919 introduced a system called diarchy, right, in the provinces. And what did it do? It divided the subjects into two parts, right, and basically transferred and reserved. So the transferred subjects were handled by Indian ministers who were answerable to the provincial legislatures, and the reserved subjects were controlled by British officials who were not accountable in that sense, right. So you see, the Government of India Act 1919 basically therefore introduced this concept of diarchy, where there is a kind of a division, okay. And subsequently later on you have Government of India Act 1935, which basically then what it did is that diarchy which was present at the provinces, okay, this basically introduced at the center with limited Indian participation, so and maintaining the British dominance. So there is this concept of, distribution of power, division of power was introduced, through this Government of India Act. However, in doing so, right, the Britishers still had the control, right, the upper edge in that sense, okay. And therefore what happened is that when the Constituent Assembly, now from this, Government of India Acts, when you read them, right, they outline the structure, they provide the basic framework of, federal distribution of power, right, in the pre-independent India, okay. And now when the Constitution Assembly, right, meets to write the constitution for the independent India, then they have all this background, right. Again, there also your reading of history becomes very important, okay. So what happens here is that again the Constituent Assembly, what kind of decision Constituent Assembly would, or the makers of the Indian Constitution would do, because the makers of the Indian Constitution are also not operating in isolation, right. They have to understand the society, right, again from GS paper 1, the prevailing context of that particular society, right. What kind of challenges were prevailing at that point of time, and how do we respond to those challenges through constitution, right, through constitutional provision. How do we respond to the challenges that prevailed at that point of time when they were sitting in the Constituent Assembly to draft the constitution for independent India? And in that context you need to again understand the princely states discourse, the integration of the princely states, right? Integration challenge, right? The integration of the princely states, right? So how do you, therefore, what kind of mechanism do you derive then? So there the Constituent Assembly, the makers of the Indian Constitution, also favored the strong center. That's why the tilt or bias towards the center, because they thought that it was very important at that juncture to make the center somewhat powerful, so that it could effectively address the challenges of that time, which were primarily, let's say, the integration of the princely states, you know, and maintaining unity and integrity of the nation, and particularly also in the context where there was lot of socio-political turmoil based on, let's say, the partition of the country, right? So, and this was also therefore influenced by national movement and post-independence needs, you see. So what was the requirement at that particular time? So the reading of the modern history actually tells us what was the prevailing, you know, situation at that particular time. The understanding of from the Indian society segment of your GS paper tells us what were the challenges at the level of the society at that point of time. And when you say at that point of time, again history, right? So this way, you see, you can always use the understanding of, let's say, history or the understanding of Indian society, which may be from the sociology, some reading of sociology. Indian society, basically it is the subject matter of sociology. So your understanding of history and sociology is going to, you know, improvise your understanding of the notions like, you know, Indian federalism, how it evolved, right? What were the imperative, and so on and so forth. Alright, so if you are enjoying the course, please do follow the, you know, Google form that is been circulated along with it, because we will be getting back to you with all your concerns, all your queries that you may have with regard to your APSC and UPSC journey. So don't forget to do that. In the meantime, don't get lost in the discussion. Though it is very good that you are enjoying the discussion, but at the same time it is equally important that we do not miss out on future important events, and so that we at CSAP IS, you know, Academy get an opportunity to help you, to guide you more effectively. And for that, if you reach out to us, we will be more happy to help you in different ways that we can help you. Alright, so now let's come to different relations. So for example, when you talk about center-state relation, right? Center-state relation. Now any relationship, for example, may have multiple dimensions, right? Any relationship may have multiple dimensions. Similarly, center-state relations can also have different dimensions, right? We can be looking at this relationship from different perspective, different angles. For example, we can look at it from legislative, as we can give the broad heading as legislative relation, which is basically, when we are saying legislative, it's basically has to do with, let's say, legal, or let's say law. It has to do with law, right? So with regard to law, or with regard to making laws, you know, with regard to legal provisions, what kind of relationship that exists between the center and the state? So that is the question that we are dealing here, right? So sometimes the terminologies may appear somewhat difficult, so you need to just break those terminologies and simplify it, right? Once you are able to break these terminologies and understand them, the task becomes much more easier. The same with the questions also. When you will have mains question, you know, as we keep on saying, that understanding the question is almost like half the answer, right? So that way you pay attention to these themes. So how do we do? As we said, the division of power, the center and state, the powers have been, you know, distributed. How? 7th schedule, right? How it has been distributed? There are 3 lists. What are the 3 lists? There is union list, state list, and concurrent list, right? So some of the subjects are there in the union list, some of the subjects are there in, you know, state list, and some in the concurrent list. So those subjects which are in the union list, there the union, you know, government, let's say parliament, will make laws. The subjects which fall upon the state list, there the state will have the jurisdiction with regard to making laws. And in the concurrent, you know, those in the concurrent list, there both center and state can make laws, right? Okay, but there is a tweak to it, that with regard to concurrent list, again the union law shall prevail if there is a conflict. So now this, when we say union law will prevail in whenever there is a conflict, this is again like referring to that bias or tilt towards the center, and we just don't need to understand that there is a bias towards the center, but why this bias? Why did the constitution makers, design the constitution in such a manner that they, made the center somewhat powerful than the state? They gave more power to the center, right? Then that understanding will flow from your reading of history, your knowledge of history, right? All right. So therefore, you have three lists, though powers have been distributed, and yet even though when we distribute the powers, there still may be some powers, because the society is evolving, some new dimension may come up, right? So these are generally referred to as the residuary powers, which are left even after the distribution, in these three list, which are basically there, union, state and concurrent list. So all those residuary powers will again be exercised by the center. So you see, from this very definition also, what becomes very clear is that with regard to law making also, the center has somewhat bias, and sometimes you also have some provisions, okay? So whereby if the parliament passes a resolution by 2/3 majority, then in the national interest, parliament can make laws even in the state subjects, okay? So even for implementing, let's say, international treaties and so on and so forth. So what is this, discussion basically telling us is that though the powers have been defined and distributed between the center and state, right, there is always this possibility of ambiguity. There can be some residuary, powers also. But even with regard to the distribution of these powers in three lists, right, there is a kind of a dominance of the center, which becomes clearly evident from this discussion, okay? Now administrative, again, how the administration would be governed. So I am not going into the detail of the articles, okay? So you can read, because when you read federalism, some of the articles would become very, very important. Like for example, in the context of discussion, I refer to article 249 without taking the name, okay? So I'm not going into the detail of all the specific articles and what these articles are saying. Of course, we need to do that. For example, when we discuss fundamental rights also, then we have to do all that, and it is expected that these key articles would be followed by aspirants who are preparing for APSC and UPSC mains, right? So now there may be directions coming from the union from time to time, right? And with those regards, though the states have their autonomy with regard to administration, but again this is basically telling you that the center will always have ways through which it can ask the state to administer on some of the issues. So the center again prevails in those cases, and here article 256. Now from article 256 to 356, right, this is very important and very controversial and very much in current news, okay, with regard to the involvement, with regard to those kind of debate that has been taking place, right? So the president's rule, right? Now you have also the interstate council to promote coordination between the center and the state, right? So article 263 basically talks about this interstate council, which will be there with regard to promote coordination. Now towards the end we will also come to the criticism part of it slightly, because though it has been there, how productive these mechanisms have been there with regard to promoting that coordination. Because whether center and state, with regard to this relationship between center and state, whether it has been very harmonious, whether it has been very smooth, or there have been some moments of ruptures, there moments of controversies, and probably this relationship has not been very smooth. Now financial relationship, now this is again very important. Finance, when we talk about, of course it has to do with economy, right? Fiscal economy, again GS3, okay? So Finance Commission for Equitable Distribution, we have through article 280, we have this Finance Commission which which is there to regulate the distribution of the finances, takes provisions and so on and so forth. Now GST regime and grant in aids, right? Now how, so basically with regard to center-state relationship, these have been the economic aspect, right? When we say there are many dimensions of relationship, but in the modern times, as we also say that earlier there was primacy of politics over economics. Politics used to determine economics, but these days this relationship has somewhat undergone changes, and today what we say, there is primacy of economics over politics. So that means your economy basically decides everything. Now you understand when I say this, you see how the US tariff and tariff war that is going on, right, and so on and so forth, right? How economy plays a very important role in the policy making, in even with regard to your foreign policies, for example, right? So the economy will in a way determine, because you cannot let your economic interests get affected. You have to take, you have to be very careful about that. So economy, so therefore in this relationship also between the center and the state, this economy plays a very, and this has been a very contested subject matter. Though there have been mechanism also, for example, with regard to GST, you have a GST council, right, where the representation of the state is also there, which is headed by the, let's say, finance minister, and you get to hear from time to time, right, GST council's meeting, and there are certain updates. Say for example, GST has been reduced in some of the, things, and that way basically, but you will find that how generally the center, again with regard to basically economy, the center has more resources and the states do not have that much of resources as the center, and many a times states therefore have to depend on the center, right, and this many a times problematizes the equilibrium between the center and the state. We have recently also heard about some of the controversies, for example with regard to GST, and compensation and other shares of the states which are not delivered to the state, or which are not allocated to the state in a time bound manner, and therefore it affects the entire functioning, entire administration of that state. And sometimes the states have been complaining that the political reasons, the political division, for example, this often happens that at the center you have a particular political party ruling, and in some of the states you have opposition political parties ruling. So how that equation again can potentially problematize the relationship with regard to finance or economy, despite the constitutional provisions being there, right? Okay, so therefore what is it that Article 356, it was made to subject to judicial review. So therefore SR Bomai made very important observations, right, emphasize on floor test in some cases wherever, so therefore it talked about how constitutional morality needs to be upheld, and the discretionary power cannot be used beyond a point, and they must also be very reasonable. Because you remember in our constitution, even when we discuss about fundamental rights, the word that is used is reasonable restriction. The state can impose some restrictions, but those restrictions have to be reasonable. So similarly, that discretionary power, use of that discretionary power cannot be just based on whims and fancies. It has to have some grounds, right? It must be reasoned, right? So therefore, and with regard to, therefore, so far from this discussion, what we have got is that, see, there is this federalism. India is a federalism. The nature of Indian federalism has been defined in many different ways. Some have called it quasi-federal also, but nonetheless Indian federalism is unique in its own design, and that was as per the requirement of the context in which our constitution was being written. Okay, and from that we found that with regard to regulating center-state relationship in India, there is a clear division of power which is mentioned in the Indian constitution. Okay, and the 7th schedule deals with it. There are 3 lists, union list, state list, concurrent list, and but apart from those 3 lists, sometimes there are residuary powers also. On all these residuary powers, again center exercises power. So we have discussed about, let's say, the administrative, financial relations, right, between the center and the state, and from all that discussion, what becomes very clear and important for all of us to understand is that in almost all regards there is this bias or tilt towards the center. But now it's not just sufficient to say that there is a tilt, but we also need to understand why this bias or tilt towards the center is there in the first place, and that we will be able to understand using the knowledge of history. So that is what we have discussed so far. So I have in nutshell, captured this for the benefit of those who have joined us very late, but I hope you will continue with us, and please do drop your feedbacks and comments. That is very, very important, and most importantly, subscribe the channel and be benefited from our subsequent live classes. Okay, now let's come to the other segment. Now the commission on, let's say, federal reforms, right? Now that we know that the functioning of this federalism has not always been smooth. Yes, their jurisdiction is constitutionally given, right? The constitution has, outlined their jurisdiction, and yet there have been moments where there have been conflict between the center and the state. This conflict many a times has got intensified, right? So now in order to regulate this, right, once you know that there are problems, there are also ways through which we can solve the problems. So with regard to that, we have two important: Sarkariya Commission, right, to examine center-state relations, right? Now what does it say, right? Limit misuse of Article 356, for example, right? And establish interstate council as permanent body. Interstate council, again, many times it is said that it has been not very functional, not very regular in its meeting. It only has advisory powers, and yet let's say here also the center plays that dominance, right? And therefore it has not been effective. So how do we channelize this center state council to be more productive in maintaining and regulating the relationship between the center and the state, right? So greater autonomy in the state list matters. So give more autonomy with regard to those subjects which are there in the state. So these were some of the key recommendations. That's again you have in 2007 Poonchi Commission, which basically highlighted the contemporary challenge and said that clear guidelines for imposing precedence rule should be there, localized emergency provision should also be there, strengthening fiscal federalism through more predictable transfers, right? So as we said, sometimes the center needs to transfer the fund, right? But let's say if the center is not doing that in a time bound manner, right, it obviously affects the center state relationship in a negative way, that is for sure, but at the same time also compromises the governance and the entire administrative functioning of a state, right? So therefore there is an imperative, there is a need to make to ensure that these transfers are done in a time bound manner, right? And so basically what these both reports or commissions basically suggest is that there has to be a cooperative federalism and institutional balance. A mechanism has to be worked out where this institutional balance is made, and that the idea of cooperative federalism, the very word cooperative federalism, let's say both center and state need to cooperate with each other, right? It is only by cooperating, because they both of them have to function in a very in some of the cases they have to function in a shared manner. So therefore how does it happen? They have to basically cooperate with each other, right? So again we can talk about the different phases, like for example early phase you have centralized governance, because you have post 1967 again the rise of regional political parties. So I think this discussion will be very lengthy if we go on to it, but then the way I'm only suggesting how in different ways we can look at these, like how with the changing political equation the debate on federalism has also undergone changes, right? And how different new requirements have come up with regard to the changes in the political scenario of the country, right? So now contemporary Niti Aayog, GST Council, these two play very important role, and there are debates also. Now contemporary tensions also, if you look at, as I just said, GST compensation delays, for example, that is collected and it goes to the center, and later on the center disburses the state's allocation from that GST, right? But many a times this distribution, this allocation of this GST compensation gets delayed, and many times some states also allege that it is intentionally done because there is an opposition political party in the state. Now these have actually intensified the problem between the center and the state. Centralizing farm laws. Now remember, now something which falls in the category of state, for example, now recently when India had come up with those 3 farm laws, again the debate erupted that it was an undue intervention in the subject matter of the state, right, and it was also constitutionally challenged therefore, right. However, nonetheless later on after much protest those farm laws were withdrawn, but nonetheless what it says is that how many a times from time to time there have emerged specific types of tensions in this relationship between the center and the state. And how do we understand is that we need to refer to the newspaper, this debates, discourse, right. So whatever is happening with regard to center-state relationship, right. For example, the recent controversy with regard to Tamil Nadu, we need to link all of these things, right. How many a times it is alleged that the governors unduly, take a longer time to give assent to some of the bills, therefore geopoliticizing, making the entire administration, suffer from it. There is a kind of a paralysis that this administrations, the governance of the state has to face because of governors, use of discretionary powers, right, in a very in a very biased manner. And sometimes many a times it is alleged that the governors, the role of the governor has been many a times been very, very controversial, and often it has been alleged by particularly the opposition ruled states that the governors often work as the agents of the central government, and therefore it is alleged that central government is making an intervention even in the functioning of the state through the use of the governor, and governor's post being a constitutional post, right, it is an abuse of the constitutional power. And many times it has been asked that such powers needs to be used in a very effective manner by following, let's say, the principle of constitutional morality, right, where the ethics of the constitution, ethical principles of the constitution should guide the actions of the governor and not the directions coming from the center, for example, right. So this is a controversy, but we need to be updated about what is going on, what are the debates, what are the issues that are that are making the news, that are in the current news. So and we need to bring them in our discussion, in our answers also, in a very subtle manner. Of course we will not have that much of space and time to elaborate upon them, but if we can just link them in our answers, that gives an impression to the examiner that I just don't only know the concept, right, but I am also aware and I can interlink the recent developments with the theme. So that always gives a very good, that makes a very good impression. So the Indian Constitution provides a federal structure with a strong bias towards the center. Okay, D.D. Basu, Introduction to Indian Constitution. Okay. Now next interlinkages, if we look at it, I think we have already talked about historical struggle for federalism. Okay, linguistic reorganization. Now we also have states reorganization, right, state reorganization, for example, right, and this becomes very important for us, though I don't have much time to go into the detail of it, but state reorganization we have on the lines of linguistic, on the basis of linguistic reorganization of the states, the first phase, second phase, third phase, and the last one again, right. Particularly the first phase of state reorganization was very successful, it is regarded, right, and the second phase now, which deals with Northeast also, it is many of the commentators, like for example Maya Chadha, who has written a very good article on state reorganization, she comments that the second state reorganization was not that effective because it dealt with Northeast, and she makes an argument that Delhi was not able to understand the complexities of Northeast because it merely saw it as a language, because the first reorganization was successful on the basis of the language. However, she argues that the problems in Northeast is not only that of language, but it is actually based on ethnicity, right. So but what is important for our discussion is that many a times there has been this greater granting of autonomy, okay, to the states, and in the beginning it was feared that granting such autonomy may actually invite dangers, right? Our unity and integrity may be threatened, but later on it proved that such granting of autonomy, sharing of power has most effectively worked in our case, in Indian context, and that we can always, even from your NCERT reading, you can refer, you can understand it even by referring the example of Belgium and Sri Lanka. For example, when Sri Lanka, Sinhala was, declared as the only official language, right, undermining the interest of the Tamil speaking people, right, it led to that kind of a, civil unrest, right, whereas the Belgium was most productively, most effectively able to manage its diversity because it functioned on the basis, on the lines of sharing of power. So, sharing of political power can work more effectively, right, in balancing that relationship, and in the Indian context we can understand this. Again, in the context of Assam also we can understand this, right. For example, what we have, think about the 1980s and 1990s, right. In Assam, immediately after the post Assam movement, the rise of this Bodo movement and the very militant phase of that Bodo movement, right, where not just this massacre but ethnic cleansing was happening, right, where the non-Bodos were massacred like anything, in order to promote their interest, their demand of separate Bodoland, and how that was eventually resolved by sharing power, by giving more autonomy to that. So, with regard to the 6th schedule, we have, like, for example, BTC, Bodoland Territorial Council, right. So, we have more sharing of power. So, earlier we had Bodoland Autonomous Council, right, Bodoland Autonomous Council. So, we have basically Autonomous Council. Now, we have Bodoland Territorial Council. So, we have given more autonomy. By giving more autonomy, now this actually tells us that where federalism, you divide powers between center and state, and within the state also this power can be divided, right, among various, so among the particularly the tribals and so on and so forth. Now, we have that BTC for as an example that we can talk about. So, 6th schedule and tribal autonomy in Assam. I hope this is clear. Because of the paucity of time, I cannot go into the depth and the detail of it, but if you like our sessions, do reach out to us, do join us, so that we can have more detailed session, more elaborate sessions with you as per your requirement, right, which will eventually help you in your preparation of both UPSC and APSC exams, right. Now, as we all have already talked about, right, fiscal, the economic aspects, right. Now, border dispute also, from the security topic, security is there again in paper 3. Now, for example, Assam and Mizoram, right, last in 2001 also we had this conflict, right, with regard to some portion of the territory, where because of the, right, interpretation, right, of two such gadgets during the British rule, there is some controversy, and the killing of some police officials, and subsequently then Mizoram alleged that Assam had exercised economic blockade by blocking the essential goods, though Assam refuted that, and eventually the centre and the Home Minister Amit Shah made an intervention, and somehow that dispute was resolved, but nonetheless these tensions basically emerge from time to time. Similarly, Assam, Meghalaya also have some kinds of dispute with regard to some of the areas, right, which are overlapping in nature, and therefore these basically have come up from time to time. All right. So, now with regard to ethical governance, right, how do you use the power? For example, governor, how does the governor use the power? Should not the governor use the power ethically? Power that is at the disposal of governor, should not that power be used ethically? Should not that power be used using the constitutional morality? Constitutional morality, right? Right? So, if the exercise of power is deprived of any ethical dimension, then it becomes a very dangerous trend, right? So therefore, this also raises the ethical questions vis-a-vis this relationship, right? And in any relationship, for example, not just center and state relationship, in order to understand, you can think of any relationship. It can be a relationship of a husband and wife, boyfriend and girlfriend. If there is an arbitrary, use of power, dictating everything, right, then that relationship would never be a healthy relationship. So similarly, with regard to the center-state relationship also, it has to be based on harmony, right? It cannot be like one is dictating the other. The center has to share more autonomy, give more autonomy to the state, and that we have learned from the very understanding of that Belgium and Sri Lanka example, which we have read in class 10th itself in NCERT book, right? Why sharing of political power is so very crucial, is so very important, right? So I hope, so therefore cooperative federalism as ethical practice. So we need to therefore promote the idea of cooperative federalism. It is not that center and state fight will take India ahead, right? After all, if India has to progress, after all, if India has to develop, right, both center and state have to, collectively work in a very harmonious way. And often the judiciary has also interpreted this relationship. For example, when there was a debate between fundamental rights and directive principle, that who should prevail, later on judiciary, gave a kind of an impression that the very formulation was wrong. Who is superior? Why do we need to think from the lines of who is superior, right? Are not they functioning the mutually complementary, goal? Their goal is common. If their goal is common, why should there be some contradiction, some conflict between them? They can always, collectively work in a harmonious manner to achieve that larger goal, right? So the formulation, the very formulation also needs to be readdressed, redefined, and therefore we need to see this, federalism also not essentially being center and state being hostile to each other, but how they can come closer, how this gap can be bridged, what are the constitutional mechanisms, what are the kind of reforms that are required to bridge this gap, so that they could collectively operate in a very harmonious manner by promoting this idea of cooperative federalism, so that they cooperate with each other in the for the larger development of the state and the country overall, right? Now, as I think we have already discussed all of these aspects, right? So NRC and border dispute resolution, again we have given the examples of Assam, Mizoram, Assam, Meghalaya, right? So from the context, and NRC again, right, is very important, but because of the paucity of time, again I will not go into the details, but some of the themes we have already discussed, right? Challenges to federalism. So centralization through ordinances. Now again ordinance, right? I will not go into the detail again, but we are just briefly capturing it, and based on your comments and feedbacks, trust me, we will come out with detailed lecture as per your requirement. So don't forget to reach out to us through your comments. That is very, very important. Okay. So ordinance, you have heard about the term ordinance Raj, right? So many times the ordinance in the constitution is there with a specific objective in mind, but when this ordinance route is used, right, taking advantage of that provision, it basically defeats the whole purpose, right? So therefore this is a very dangerous trend. When these centralizing tendencies are, centralizing tendencies get reflected through ordinance route, it is a very dangerous thing. It is very risky. It is not a very healthy trend. Now fiscal dependence of states, again, if the states have to be constantly dependent upon center, right, then that relationship again would not be very healthy, relationship, right? We have also been talking about, let's say, women empowerment, right? In a relationship, if women is all the time dependent on our male counterpart, right, then that may create another set of problems, right, where let's say the male counterpart may be dictatorial, may impose certain things, so where the autonomy or the agency of the women will not be there. So in any relationship, therefore, right, having this kind of a financial independence becomes very, very important, and particularly let's say with regard to the northeastern context, because we heavily rely on the center's assistance also. Many of the centrally sponsored projects are part of our development projects. So if there is a tomorrow conflict between the center and state, let's say even on the basis of which political party is ruling, of course at present, let's say with regard to Assam, there is no contradiction because the BJP is ruling at the center and at the state also. But if tomorrow there is any change, right, so this may problematize the overall development of Northeast. So that is a matter of concern, and therefore that needs to be streamlined. Okay. Now political misuse, we have talked. Asymmetrical federalism, I think this debate I have talked about. This asymmetry basically refers to that, where division, I think in the last video lecture session also we talked about it, right. This refers to unevenness with regard to distribution of powers between center and state. Different states may have different requirements. As I just said, Northeast for example have some specific requirements, all the states are not so equally developed, right, and in order to promote those states interest who are lagging behind, there are provisions in the constitution, right, which are generally referred to as asymmetrical provisions or asymmetry, where there is unevenness with regard to distribution of power between center and state. Okay. So now Indian federalism thrives on managing asymmetry while navigating centralizing pressures, right. So we need to therefore manage. So Indian federalism basically manages asymmetry, right. So all the states are not at equal footing, so therefore they are at different footing, different level. So these asymmetries need to be managed through constitutional provisions by offering more grants in with regard to some of the states, for example, right, because they are financially not in that position. So these states would naturally require more assistance from the center. Okay, and but nonetheless there are some centralizing pressures or tendencies are very much evident in the functioning of Indian federalism. Okay, so what is the way forward now that there are problems, but you as administrator tomorrow when you will become a bureaucrat, you have to not just talk about problems, but most effectively you have to talk about the solutions, right. So how do we come up with the solution? So that becomes again very important for us. Now we need to center in interstate and zonal councils, as we already said. We need to empower them, we need to have more regular sessions of such forums, right, and reform finance commission, right. We need to revisit the finance commissions, the various provisions and its functioning. We need to relook upon all these aspects, right, and ensure judicial override. So basically we need to uphold that constitutional morality is exercised in the functioning of this center-state relationship, and particularly let's say the governor who plays a very important role, that it has to be ensured as per the recommendation of the various commissions also, that this discretionary power is not abused by the governor, right, and there has to be reasoned exercise of this discretionary power, right. So Assam specific recommendation also we can talk about, right. We need to empower autonomous council. Remember the example of Belgium we talked about in brief. We need to learn from that, right. So why do we learn history? Why do we read history? Because from history we learn important lessons, right, and use those lessons in the different context. So the example of Sri Lanka and Belgium therefore becomes very useful, and I told you that how we could overcome that problem of militant politics of Bodo movement, where a kind of a ethnic cleansing was happening, where innocent civilians were murdered, massacred, right. We were able to overcome, not just through by seeing it as a law and order problem, but by seeing it as a political problem and thereby trying to come out with political solution of that problem, right. So that way we have been able to effectively deal with it, and I think there is this need to empower them, right. Just the way with regard to center and state relationship, the states need to be empowered, given more financial autonomy and space, right. Similarly with regard to within the Assam also, we regard to give more power to autonomous councils, right, and peaceful resolution of border disputes, right. We need to find ways through which we can tripartite agreement, we can reach out, we can make peaceful resolution of these disputes, right. So then we have some of the important previous year questions from the topics which we can take up. So this topic has been very important, as you know, right. So some of the important questions that have been asked in the previous year, if I can tell you, for example, if I say in the year 2020 in Assam mains, APSC mains, the question was asked like, do you think cooperative federalism exists in India? Substantiate your answer. So whether cooperative federalism exists in India or not, right. So that was the question, you see. So next is like, it was asked that critically assess the use of article 249 of the Indian Constitution and that it empowers the parliament to make laws on matters listed in the state list in national interest. We just discussed, remember I was telling, without taking the name of the article, I have discussed that. So article 249, right, which basically empowers the parliament to make an intervention vis-a-vis the state list, subjects of state list, right, in the national interest, when the parliament, when the Rajya Sabha passes a resolution with 2/3 of the majority. So we have to write a note on that, right. So that's the question is coming from, right. So this way you have every year one or the other question has been coming from this particular topic. So based on this assessment, based on this understanding, we can also sense that there may be a question this year also from the topic. And what kind of questions may be there? For example, there may be, let's say they may ask, examine the implications of the growing trend of using governor's office to influence state politics, right. How governor's office is used, right, governor's office is used to affect state politics, right, state politics, governor, right. Again here the center plays an important role with regard to governor, the appointment of the governor on the aid and advice of the council of ministers. So in that sense, council of minister again headed by the prime minister. So in a way you can say the center plays an important role with regard to the appointment of governor, but then that governor and his or her decision or functioning can potentially affect the state politics, right. It can affect state politics or not. Yes, we have the recent controversies and you have to immediately think about all of that and how it has happened and how judiciary has also commented on that, right. So this is a very pressing, very important matter which is currently in news, and therefore that that information you need to process, you need to, from your everyday reading of your newspaper, you need to derive that and you need to make some bullet points in your notebook, right. So you need to talk about that, right. So how from article 153 to 162, for example, right, governor, who is the constitutional head of a state, right, is meant to act on the aid and advice of the elected government, state government, right. So the appointment in that sense is made by center, but he or she is supposed to operate on the basis of the aid and advice of the state government, isn't it. So therefore but many a times it may not be like so, right, because there are many times allegations that this power have been abused by the governor, right. And therefore so many a times you have such allegations. Let's say for example, recent changes we can talk about the delay in giving assent to bills passed by state legislatures. For example, state legislature have passed the bill, but the governors have not given assent to those bills in a time bound manner, right. So this is again creates problem, and you can cite the example of Tamil Nadu, Kerala, that has been in news, and frequent summoning and proroguing of state assemblies contrary to elected government's wishes, sometimes making controversial comments and public criticism of elected state government. So that way the governor may actually harm the reputation of the elected state government. Again this may create some kinds of problems in the functioning of between center and state relationship, it problematizes, right. So it in that sense will go on to undermine the will of the people, because the government is then in that sense elected government, right, the state government in that sense, right. So therefore what we find is that there are cases, instances, examples of how this governor's office has been, used for serving political purposes by the center. There have been at least many such allegations from time to time, and there have also been some specific case studies, case examples, whereby we can show that this delay has, is somewhat cannot be justified, and the Supreme Court has also made an observation on that, right. So therefore now we can conclude, we can come to conclude. So I hope I have done justice with it. I have also provided some of the previous year questions, and I have also given you a hint like what kind of probable, what type of questions that may be asked in this year's mains exam from the topic. Of course, the depth, the detailed discussion that is required is not possible within such a short span of time, but as I told you very repeatedly, that if you join us, if you reach out to us through either through the Google form or by leaving your comments in the comment section, believe me, we will do everything possible from our side to help you, to guide you in the best possible manner that is possible for us. Now coming to the conclusion, we have said that federalism is a dynamic and evolving governance model. Now this federalism also keeps on undergoing changes, and again depends on the context, right, depends on what type of political equations are there between center and state. So it is very much evolving, just the way society is evolving, our constitution is dynamic. So similarly the notion, the concept of federalism is also very much dynamic, and it evolves in a day-to-day basis, right. So it is again we can always interconnect with constitutional values and multiple GS papers that we have shown in our discussion, that how this topic of federalism can be interlinked with both the ethics paper and also other important GS papers, right. And this federalism basically holds unity in diversity, right. Again from GS1, right, paper we have, especially for Assam, right, it is very, very important, as we said, like through the 6th schedule, granting of more autonomy to the 6th schedule, various autonomous councils, territorial councils and so on and so forth, right. So federalism, so basically true federalism is, Niti Ayog's report basically makes a comment that true federalism is not about division but about partnership for progress. So that's what is cooperative federalism. They have to work as partners for the broader progress of the nation, where when the country is progressing, of course every part of the country also has to progress. That's why this concept of asymmetrical federalism is there. But what is important is that, so it has to be a partnership for progress. It is not just about division of power, but it has to be interpreted in a way that it is actually a partnership where both center and state have to come together and take forward the progress, the journey of development of the state or the country. So with this, I think we have tried to sum up this important topic of federalism and center-state relations. I am thankful to all of you for joining and listening through this discussion. Those who are going through this discussion after the live session, I hope you can in between pause this video and leave your comments based on your assessment of this live video, and trust me, your comments, your feedbacks will only help us improvise upon it, and we will refine, and we will also incorporate the topics that you will suggest from time to time, and we'll try to come up with those. Our objective, we at CSAP IS Academy are committed to help all of you in your preparation, and this is our unique initiative to run these free live sessions with an objective to help our students who are preparing for their both either UPSC or APSC mains. So with that objective, we have come up with an objective to help our students in their preparation. We have come up, and therefore whatever it needs to be done for the sake of helping you, we at CSAP IS Academy are very much committed, and I hope with your comments and feedbacks you will provide us that opportunity to best help you. So with that objective we are functioning here, and with all that note, let me thank once again all of you, and I wish you all the very best in your journey of becoming a bureaucrat, and I hope your getting selected in the bureaucracy will not only bring about a change in your personal life, but effectively it will bring about a transformation and change in our society, and thereby effectively contributing to the overall progress and development of our country. With that, let us wind up today's session. Thank you once again everyone for joining and listening through this discussion. We will meet in the next subsequent sessions of our free live sessions. You continue to join us, subscribe our channel and be with us. Till then, you all take care and have a great time. I wish all of you all the very best in this journey. Thank you.